Pursuant to Standing Order 81.5, Supplementary Estimates A 2018-19, votes 1A, 5A and 10A under Department of Fisheries and Oceans referred to committee on Wednesday, October 24, 2018. Welcome everybody to our regularly scheduled committee meeting. I want to say a special welcome, of course, to the Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson, Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard, his Parliamentary Secretary, Mr Sean Casey, and departmental officials. We have Catherine Blewett, Deputy Minister, Sylvia Lapointe, Assistant Deputy Minister, Fisheries and Harbour Management, Philippe Morel, Assistant Deputy Minister, Aquatic Ecosystem Sector, Jane O'Donoghue, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Financial Officer, Kevin Stringer, Associate Deputy Minister, Jeffrey Hutchinson, Commissioner of the Canadian Coast Guard. And I know none of you are strangers to the committee. You've certainly been here before. I'd also like to welcome member on the Conservative side, Mr David Yordiga, for filling in today. Welcome to the committee from Fort McMurray, Cold Lake. And as well as a guest observer, I guess, and maybe someone who will want to ask a question a little later, Ms Elizabeth May, member from Saanich Gulf Islands. Welcome. So, Minister, the floor is yours for 7 minutes or less, sir.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here in my role as Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard to discuss the Supplementary Estimates A for 2018-2019. As was noted, I'm accompanied by a number of my officials and the Honourable Sean Casey, my very able Parliamentary Secretary. I am honoured to have been entrusted by the Prime Minister to play a leadership role in the protection of our oceans, coasts, waterways and fisheries to ensure they are healthy today and for future generations. Depuis que j'ai été nommé ministre, j'ai...
Since being appointed as Minister, I have developed additional appreciation of the work being done by the communities whose livelihoods depend on our fisheries and oceans and by my department. I am committed to building strong partnerships to protect our oceans and freshwater resources, not just in Canada, but as part of a global effort in the face of significant changes to climate and habitat around the world.
I commend members of this committee for your efforts to help strengthen both the Oceans Act and the Fisheries Act. These pieces of legislation will be integral to restoring lost protections to fish and fish habitat and moving us towards our marine conservation targets. Thank you for inviting me today to discuss Supplementary Estimates A. Fisheries and Oceans Canada, including the Canadian Coast Guard, is seeking Parliament's approval of $980 million through these estimates. The men and women of the Coast Guard are hard at work every day across this country, and our government is committed to providing them the tools they need to keep Canadians safe, to protect our marine environment, and to keep our economy moving. That is why over 80% of funding for Supplementary Estimates A, $827.3 million, is to be spent on updating the Coast Guard's fleet through the purchase and upgrade of 3 icebreakers from Chantier Davy in Quebec. The ships will help to ensure that the Coast Guard maintains icebreaking capacity over the next 15 to 20 years as our fleet is being renewed. Another $57.8 million out of the estimates will go to the Coast Guard's offshore oceanographic science vessel project to allow for the completion of the engineering phase as well as purchase material to advance the construction of the ship. Comme le comité le sait, les zones côtières.
As this committee knows, Canada's freshwater and marine coastal areas are inextricably linked to the economic prosperity of Canadians. Our government has an obligation, therefore, to incorporate modern safeguards and restore lost protections to the Fisheries Act. That is why $21.5 million is being sought for C-68 to ensure that should amendments pass in the other place, we will have the capacity to implement the Act in a timely manner.
68 when it comes to Indigenous consultations and negotiations. Some funding included in the estimates, $48.9 million, will support negotiations and reconciliation efforts with Indigenous peoples, specifically to implement treaty obligations such as undertaking fisheries studies and enabling access to fisheries, both of which will help Indigenous communities improve capacity for self-government and self-determination. I would like to take a brief moment to outline some of the important work the Department has been doing as a result of previous investments. Il y a 2 ans, notre gouvernement a lancé notre...
2 years ago, our government launched the historic $1.5 billion Oceans Protection Plan to make our oceans cleaner, safer, and healthier. Since the creation of the Oceans Protection Plan, we've worked tirelessly to protect our marine and coastal areas, endangered whales, and prevent and respond to oil spills.
are an area that our government is firmly committed to through investments in new measures, enhancing Coast Guard capacity with new radar, reopening of the Kitsilano Coast Guard base. We are leasing 2 offshore towing vessels for use in the waters off the west coast and increasing our towing capacity by installing tow kits on all of the Coast Guard's major vessels. These types of projects will help us to avoid potential marine pollution incidents. We are also strengthening the Coast Guard's capacity to respond to incidents. For example, we purchased 23 portable skimmers and 67,000 feet of curtain booms to help with potential spills, and we opened 4 Coast Guard facilities, including 2 search and rescue stations. A few weeks ago, I introduced new measures and $61.5 million to further safeguard the South resident killer whale population. By increasing access to food, reducing threats from vessels, and protecting against contaminants, we are taking decisive action. Beyond implementation of the OPP, we are making significant progress in other areas as well. For instance, we have now protected almost 8% of our marine and coastal areas, up from just 1% when this government came to office in 2015. My officials and I will continue to work to ensure we achieve Canada's 10% commitment by 2020. Je voudrais également souligner certains investissements.
I would also like to highlight some of the investments in infrastructure that we are making to ensure that our communities are well supported. In Budget 2018, we announced a $250 million commitment to renewing Canada's network of small craft harbours. This funding is helping to accelerate repairs and enhance existing installations for planned projects at core commercial fishing harbours and at non-core harbours. Small craft harbours are key economic hubs in coastal communities across Canada, supporting regional fishing industries.
G7 presidency, Ministers McKenna, Sohi, and I co-hosted the G7 ministerial meeting in September on the theme of working together on climate change, oceans, and clean energy. We made progress in a number of areas related to healthy oceans and resilient communities. By combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing and addressing marine plastic pollution by signing on to the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, we will support sustainable oceans and fisheries management. Nous augmenterons également nos
We will also increase our knowledge by expanding our global observation efforts and sharing scientific data. In support of the development of clean and resilient energy systems in low-lying coastal communities that are vulnerable to challenging weather conditions.
Progress we have made to date, but I am sure that you will agree there's still much more to do. Our government will continue to lead the way on new and innovative policies and actions that provide meaningful and lasting protections for our oceans and freshwater resources. Thank you, and I would like to turn to my Parliamentary Secretary, who will share a little bit about the work he is doing.
Thank you, Minister. I'm pleased to be here with the Minister in my role as Parliamentary Secretary, supporting him on various files, including North Atlantic right whales and belugas. Indeed, as the Minister has indicated, our government has made significant investments that are balancing the protection of our marine and coastal areas with the economic needs of our communities. This year, I'm pleased to report, and I'm sure that the committee members well know, that not one right whale has died in Canadian waters as a result of a ship strike or fishing gear entanglement. And we're grateful to vessel captains and fishers who are following the protection strategies that we've put in place. The Minister
took part in a roundtable recently with the industry to discuss new right whale protection methods for the new season in 2019.
The marine mammals regulations to put in place species-specific approach distances for species such as belugas to reduce underwater noise caused by ships. We know that more needs to be done, and we're working to reduce other key threats to belugas such as pollution and prey availability. Nous avons récemment alloué du financement pour la recherche.
We recently granted funding on research to better understand the effect of contaminants on the various species of priority whales.
Consult with Indigenous groups, provinces and territories and industry to best address concerns in our efforts to continue conservation and protection measures. And I will now turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Jen O'Donoghue, to present a few more financial details regarding the supplementary estimates, following which we'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. Mon nom est Jen O'Donoghue, dirigeante principale des finances de
Chief Financial Officer and Assistant Deputy Minister for the Canadian Coast Guard and Fisheries. We are pleased to be here today to give you an overview of the supplementary estimates 2018-2019.
Two supplementary exercises planned for this fiscal year. They present the department's revised spending plans, which were either not sufficiently developed in time for inclusion in the main estimates or have subsequently been refined. The items presented today include all Treasury Board approvals since the main estimates and exclude Budget 2018 items. As with all supply bills, they are referred to committee where the contents are studied before voting actually takes place. As
the Minister mentioned, we're asking for Parliament's approval for $980 million. Large majority of this funding is under 0.5 capital expenditures.
$7.3 million for 3 icebreakers, $57.8 million for our offshore oceanographic science vessel, $33.8 million to advance reconciliation and Indigenous issues, and $21.5 million to implement the amended Fisheries Act. The remaining 14 items are other initiatives, some technical reinvestments, and transfers to and from other departments. These items can be found on page 237 and 238 in the explanation of requirements section, ou la page 282 ou 283.
282, 283 in the French version.
Budget 2018 initially identified $217 million for 5 DFO-led measures in fiscal year 2018-19. To date, approximately $120 million in authorities have been granted to the department, including $87.2 million for renewing Canada's network of small-craft harbours this fiscal year. Thank you for allowing me the time to present today. Nous serons maintenant heureux de répondre à toutes vos questions.
We'll be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. We'll go to questioning now, and I'll remind members I'm going to try and be very strict on the time. I know everybody wants to get in some questions, so we'll try and stick to it as much as possible. Now to the government side, Mr. Morrissey for 7 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to the new Minister to this committee. It's first opportunity, and the Parliamentary Secretary. Yes, first. Minister, obviously you are well aware that the fisheries and the related health of the oceans are the lifeblood of hundreds of coastal communities and the people that depend on those across this country. I have 2 questions. My first would be in the area directly under you, which was we've seen an erosion of resources directed towards protection, the protection side of the department over the years. And at the same time, we were asking fishers to engage in more conservation measures to protect the resource. The point they make to me always is while the industry is doing significant measures to conserve the resource, they did not see the same amount of effort coming from the department on the ensuring there was adequate protection. Could you comment on that? And then I have another question.
Sure. I mean, obviously, in the context of a sustainable fishery, it's extremely important that we're basing quota decisions on science, and so the department certainly is working hard to ensure it has the appropriate resources and the appropriate capacity to do that. It relies on fishers to be doing the good work and ensuring that they're participating in fisheries, but it also requires that we have enforcement, that we have appropriate enforcement with respect to ensuring that the rules are being followed and that quotas can, and the catches can be relied on in the context of the work we're doing. So I'm happy to say that we have been doing a lot of work to reinvest in the enforcement side of DFO. In 2018 alone, we had 3 troops of newly qualified fisheries officers who graduated in March, June, and November. In total, 72 new fisheries officers have joined the department and are serving Canadians at detachments across the country. A further 16 fishery officer cadets are currently in training and are expected to graduate in March of 2019, which will bring the total number of new fisheries officers to 88, which may well be a record of new officers graduated in a single year. It is definitely something that we are focused on.
Thank you, Minister. Indeed, that information will be well received by the industry. My second question goes to the growing awareness within the industry that the oceans can no longer be used as a dumping ground. There's consequences to the industry, to the very stocks that the fishermen depend on. on a number of issues. One is the issue of plastics within the oceans. The other is the area of the illegal fishing and ghost fishing and that particular area. I would like for you to comment, given your leadership role as Canada's the G7 leader in this area, how you look to bringing more awareness on these two critical issues and how we can begin to address them, because for some time it was an issue that was swept under the rug, but it is one that we're seeing every day. In fact, there's new awareness today of the death of a lot of seaborne mammals because of plastics, and this is an issue that has to be dealt with. I would like it if you could comment on how you view your position, your ministry, in reacting to those two significant global issues that will have a very real impact on coastal communities in Canada.
Yeah, the issues of plastics in the ocean, both plastics that come from terrestrial sources, but in the context of fisheries and oceans, particularly ghost gear, and the ghost gear that's floating in the oceans, which by weight is almost half of the plastics that are actually entering the oceans these days, and the issue of unregulated illegal fishing, are both really important and go to the heart of the sustainability of the fishery. In order to manage a fishery in a thoughtful way on an international basis, you need to know how many fish are being taken, and with the illegal fishing, it becomes very, very difficult to do that. Similarly, if there are large numbers of both marine mammals and fish that are being killed by ghost gear and or other plastics, it again becomes very difficult to manage the sustainability of the fishery. So we have made that a major push in our G7 presidency, both at the level of leaders, but also Minister McKenna and I led the conversations with G7 ministers in Halifax. It is also a key focus of the Kenya Blue Oceans Conference, which Kenya and Canada are co-hosting next week. I'm actually leaving on Friday for that conference. It's definitely something that we are working with in terms of our international partners, and we are working to ensure that from a domestic perspective, we are walking the walk.
Minister, can you point to any concrete examples of technology that may be available or methodology to rid the oceans of plastics?
So, I mean, I think part of this is domestically is actually developing a coherent strategy which aligns some of the regulatory issues that we have around things like ghost gear and trying to ensure that we're creating incentives for people to actually do the right thing in terms of returning gear. But it's also a technology issue in terms of can we make that easier in terms of extracting ghost gear and bringing it back, but also can we actually think about ghost gear in the context of a circular economy where we're trying to actually figure out how to create products out of what has been thought of as waste in the same way that we do with manure now, and we create methane out of it. I was with a group of young people at the G7 who were actually having a roundtable on this subject, and one of the young people from the United Kingdom had actually started a company that makes carpets out of used ghost gear. I mean, and of course there's lots of questions about the economics and all of those kinds of things, but I think those are the kinds of things that we need to be incenting people to actually do.
30 seconds.
Just briefly, as you're closing, I question you briefly on the protection side, but you cannot manage the fishery without an adequate data from the science side and biology. Could you comment briefly on how the department has been moving in that area?
Science is fundamental to making good decisions with respect to fisheries management, and so we have been reinvesting in the science capacity of the department. That is a process that certainly takes time. It's not just a matter of numbers, it's also a matter of experience. But it is something that we are fundamentally committed to do. We have allocated additional resources to do that, and I would suggest that we will be looking to continue to do that in terms of enhancing the scientific capacity of the department.
Okay. Thank you. Now on to the Conservative side, Mr. Calkins for 7 minutes or less.
Well, that was me.
Okay.
You said me?
We can switch out. Yeah, okay. Mr. Ranald for 7 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here, and all of your staff. I'm glad you mentioned a couple of things in your opening comments, because I'm going to refer to your address September 20th to the G7 ministerial meeting. In those comments, you said that when it comes to man-made pollution in the world's oceans, Canada is taking action. As a federal government, we are moving towards making our operations low carbon, resilient, and green. As a country, we're moving towards zero plastic waste by keeping plastic out of the oceans and landfills. One thing you don't mention in this regarding keeping our oceans clean is sewage dumps and sewage outflows. Those have been identified as significant issues on the West Coast, East Coast as well. I can quote some numbers out of the St. Lawrence River over the last few years, but I think you're probably well aware of those. Why is that not mentioned in any of your statement or your plan?
So it's a very good question. Let me start by saying that the regulations with respect to wastewater treatment in Canada are actually the purview of the Minister of the Environment rather than the Minister of Fisheries. But I would say that it is an important issue. It is one that in Canada we do need to address. As you will be aware, there is a schedule for all of the major wastewater treatment facilities that are not currently in compliance with doing secondary treatment, being in compliance by either 2020 or 2030. We have allocated significant funding, green infrastructure funding, to accelerating that process. There is a new wastewater treatment plant actually being built in my riding in North Vancouver. There is a new wastewater treatment plant being built in Victoria, which presently has no wastewater treatment, which is appalling. And there are a number of similar facilities being constructed across this country, but it's a very important issue, and it's one that we definitely need to address.
Thank you. On to the next, a different topic now. The Oceans Protection Plan, $1.5 billion originally announced in that. Could you tell us how much of that has already been spent?
So the Oceans Protection Plan is a project that actually crosses a number of different departments. So it involves Fisheries and Oceans, it involves Transport, it involves Environment Canada. I would say that approximately $800 million of that has been spent, but that's not simply by Fisheries and Oceans. And maybe I can just ask my CFO to just supplement that. Yeah,
so the actual spending last fiscal year was $152 million. $800 million has been announced in terms of spending in 2017 and 2018.
Out of $1.5 billion, approximately 10% has actually been spent?
So the amount of money for OPP was over 5 years for all of those departments. So there is planned spending specifically in each year. So that was approximately what the planned spending was for last year.
Okay, thank you. The icebreaker plan, Canadian Coast Guard, Canadian press report states that the 3 Norwegian-made icebreakers will cost up to 30% more than projected due to import tariffs and brokerage fees and other costs. Why were these tariffs and costs and additional costs not included in DFO's original estimates?
Let me start the answer, and then maybe I'll ask the Commissioner of the Coast Guard to supplement it. The original number was actually the contract with Davy for the acquisition of the 3 icebreakers. The additional costs that were budgeted within the government are to cover things that are separate from the contract. The vast majority of that are tariffs, so they're actually, essentially, we pay them, we get them back, so they're a net no cost. There are some modest conversion costs that are associated with that, and so that's generally the explanation, but I maybe can ask the Commissioner to supplement that.
That's exactly right, Minister. So by separating out the 610, it actually gives line of sight on how much the contract is for the delivery of the vessels, including bringing the first of the 3 vessels to a regulatory standard that will allow us to use it this year. Much of that other money, as the Minister's already noted, flows back to Canada. Those import tariffs, for example, leave one pocket and come back to the other pocket. So they're not reflective of a true cost. And if we included them in the total cost of the contract, it would actually make ship purchase and shipbuilding contracts more difficult to compare rather than less difficult to compare.
Thank you. 2 minutes? Thank you. Minister, over the past year, there's been some significant restrictions placed on fishers on both coasts in regard to protection of whales, both the right whales on the west coast and the southern resident killer whales on the west coast, pardon me, and the right whales on the east coast. These significant restrictions were put in place after lengthy consultation with the locals, with the fishing groups, with advisory boards, and yet the restrictions that were put in place on the West Coast were not in line with what was recommended by the groups that had consulted heavily with fisheries. They have impacted those local economies significantly in a negative way. Have you had any discussions with those communities on those negative impacts? And have you had any indication of results from those significant restrictions that were put in place? Any positive results?
So let me talk a little bit about the South Resident killer whale, and then I'll ask the Parliamentary Secretary to talk about the right whales. We have in Canada, as you know, a Species at Risk Act, and both of these are endangered species. There is an imminent threat. There was a finding of an imminent threat to the South Resident killer whale, and so that means that there is a requirement for the government to act to address the biological needs. Of course, in looking at how to best do that, we think through various pathways to get there, and certainly look at ways in which to do that that will have the least economic impacts. And so the consultations that go on with communities, fishing communities, both recreational and commercial, with the transportation industry in terms of shipping, are all very important. I've had many conversations with both, including a Chamber of Commerce roundtable with many of the West Coast of Vancouver Island communities that are actually involved in this fishery. And we are certainly looking to incorporate their thoughts and their concerns into how we go forward. But the bottom line is we need to act to address the critical issues facing these whales. And so we will do so and have been doing so in a manner as sensitive as possible from an economic perspective.
Sorry, Mr. Casey, you'll try and get that in a later question. Perhaps time is up. And now to the NDP. Mr. Donnelly for 7 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the Minister and his team of officials. Minister, on the topic of owner-operator fleet separation on the West Coast, the federal government has the duty to conserve, manage and develop the fishery in the public interest and for the benefit of Canadians. The best way to do that is to keep fishing licenses in the hands of the people who fish and live in the fishing communities. This week we celebrate World Fisheries Day, and I'll be meeting with fishers from British Columbia who want to know, as Minister from British Columbia, or a Minister from British Columbia, do you support owner-operator fleet separation for BC fishers?
So as you know, in Bill C-68, there are a number of provisions that relate to the owner-operator policies, although those policies apply primarily in the Atlantic provinces and Quebec. We certainly are aware that there are some who in the Pacific region who are interested in seeing measures similar to those in Atlantic Canada. There are others who have a different perspective on that, and so that is something that we are certainly thinking of and discussing. We're very interested in the work that the committee is going to be doing with respect to this issue. I think it will help us in the context of trying to figure out what the right pathway is here. And maybe, Sylvie, did you want to comment anything further?
I think you've covered it, Minister, and I've got a few other questions in short time. So just on the Cohen Commission recommendations, you recently announced that the department had acted on all of Justice Cohen's recommendations. However, recommendation 75, and I'll just remind you, reads, an independent body such as the Office of the Commissioner on the Environment and Sustainable Development should report to the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans and to the public as follows, and there's a schedule March 31st, 2014, and every 2 years thereafter during implementation of the wild salmon policy on progress in implementing the policy in relation to Fraser River sockeye salmon by September 30th, 2015 on the extent to which and the manner in which this Commission's recommendations have been implemented. So we've heard from the Department about the status of the implementation of Cohen's recommendations, but we haven't heard from an independent body as per recommendation 75. So do you plan on acting on recommendation 75 by asking the Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development to report to the committee and the public on the extent to which and the manner in which the Cohen Commission's recommendations have been implemented to date?
Yeah, I think my precise wording was that we had responded to and described the actions we had taken in response to the various recommendations of the Cohen report. I didn't say that we had acted on exactly what the Commissioner had said on every one of those recommendations. We certainly are interested in moving forward. We are working very actively with the province of British Columbia on trying to align what we are doing, not just for sockeye salmon, but for salmon more generally in British Columbia, and ensuring that we have a holistic approach to ensuring that we are doing everything we possibly can to sustain those runs that are healthy and to turn around some of those runs that are clearly not.
But reporting to the public, an independent body, is there a commitment for that one?
As I mentioned, I mean, we've been very transparent in terms of everything that we actually are doing is now published online, and so we're working with a transparent, and the Commissioner has the full ability to review whatever it is that she wants to review, as she has done in areas like aquaculture.
Okay. Turning to another subject, sport fishing in British Columbia. Sport fishers are seeking a regulation change and getting nowhere with department officials on what I think appears to be a fairly straightforward change. They're seeking to have a current description that catch records must be recorded on a tidal angling license in, quote, ink, to be, quote, being recorded permanently. So it's a one-word change, ink to permanent. That would eliminate the necessity of printing license on paper and allow for electronic record keeping, which then becomes transferable. Can you help resolve this matter?
Yes, Jerry Christensen has raised this with me a few times, and certainly directionally, I mean, I think directionally we're supportive, but maybe I can turn it over to Kevin and he can talk a little bit about where we're at with that issue.
No, it's we've all had the same visitation on that issue. It is a small change in terms of a regulation which would make it much easier to move forward on some of the things that the recreational fishery wants to do and we want to do on monitoring, on being more modern and being able to use the Fisher app that they've developed. We are seeking to have this done, working on a number of small regulatory changes, this being one of them, so we are on it.
Great, and I think they would appreciate that commitment. Thanks, Minister. I think I have time for one last question in this round. On the ocean protection plan, supplementary estimates include $5.3 million to improve marine safety under the OPP. I think we can all agree that's a tiny amount. The question that I was going to ask has been asked: how much has been spent to date? The comment was $152 million. With, I think, Minister, you said $800 million has been announced. Can you provide the committee with the complete list of initiatives, including information such as geographic location, amount of funding, and description of the project funded by the OPP? That's something that we've tried to track down on the website and different departments. We get, well, that depends if it's Fisheries or Transport Canada, et cetera. So having that sent to the committee would be helpful. And in the remaining seconds, could you tell me if you have developed or if the department knows if the technology to clean up dillbit exists? And we've talked about this in the past.
So certainly with respect to your request, we can certainly pull together a list of everything that's been announced across departments. That's not a problem. In terms of diluted bitumen, and you and I have had many conversations about this, there is a lot of information out there both about the behavior of diluted bitumen relative to conventional crudes, but also about the effectiveness of various cleanup methods, and that's all very public, and there's more science and more information that's being published all the time.
Is it in place, the technology to clean it up?
Yeah, I mean, some of the investments that we're making with respect to the Coast Guard are exactly about that, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. And now to the government side again, to Mr. Rogers for 7 minutes or less. It's time to get up, Charles.
Sorry. We're done. Yeah. Wake up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, thank you for being here and guests. I have a couple of questions around Coast Guard issues, so perhaps Mr. Hutchinson can also chime in on some of this. Could you provide an update on the lifeboat stations in Newfoundland and Labrador to be constructed in Old Purlican, Twillingate and St. Anthony? What is the timeline for completion and when will they become operational?
So As you've noted, we announced the new lifeboat stations, 3 in Newfoundland and Labrador and 4 on the Pacific coast. The station at Old Perlican, I believe, will be open in the summer of 2019, with construction already way in on schedule, but maybe I can ask the Commissioner to talk about the other 2.
Certainly. The station at St. Anthony's has already been refurbished. There has been a Bay-class boat delivered to that station. It's operational today as we speak. As the Minister said, the station at Old Perlican is on schedule to be open and functioning next year, and Twillygate will follow after that. I would think we would have it operational for summer 2020.
Minister, in last election, we made a commitment to reopen the Maritime Rescue Substation in St. John's, Newfoundland, that was closed by the ARPA government. And in May, it reopened. Promise made, promise kept. Could you comment on the importance of these maritime rescue stations and how our government is investing to keep our oceans safe through significant investments in the Canadian Coast Guard?
So the reopening of the sub-centre in St. John's was, I think, very important. It was a commitment that we made. It was very similar on the west coast to the reopening of the Kitsilano Coast Guard base that had been closed previously. Since becoming operational, the rescue sub-centre in St. John's has worked on 452 incidents, and some fairly high-profile cases, including less than a week after opening, the Coast Guard provided humanitarian support to the local Royal Newfoundland Constabulary to assist with rescuing an individual who had fallen off the Signal Hill Trail. There are a whole range of others that I could go through where having that substation in place has been incredibly important from a safety perspective. I don't know if you wanted to answer or add anything there.
I'd simply add that the substation has received in excess of 22,000 calls, and I think that that indicates that there's a volume to be managed through that office. Very importantly to us is the 24/7 capacity that it offers. While it supplements the work of the JRCC in Halifax, having that 24/7 backup is any world-class system has to have backups in place.
Living on the island, of course, and seeing the impact that the ocean can have in major storms we saw the past week, I truly appreciate the commitment you've made and the work we're doing here. Minister, snow crab, as you know, is a valuable resource for many fishers on the East Coast, particularly Newfoundland and Labrador. And today, many have major concerns about the 2019 total allowable catch and the reforms or references to the precautionary approach to management principles and so on. I've heard from some of them following some meetings with some DFO officials. So could you comment on your department's plans to address these concerns, the concerns of fishers that are calling us and asking about the 2019 quota for snow crab?
So the snow crab stocks, as you know, have been on a declining trend for some time, and that is obviously a significant concern. We need to be relying on science-based decision-making for ensuring sustainable harvest of our oceans. The current research suggests that the snow crab stock may be challenged to maintain the current level of fishing given the declines that we are seeing. And a precautionary approach in that context, I think, is essential to prevent long-term damage to the stock. So we're developing a framework for snow crab. It was published actually initially in October, and we're in the process now of holding consultations with fishers to ensure that we are incorporating their thoughts on the path forward.
I would ask, Minister, that your officials and you certainly pay close attention to the fishers in the industry, the local knowledge they bring to the management of this resource and this stock. They obviously rely heavily on it for their livelihood, and I urge you to pay close attention to what the people on the ground are saying in Newfoundland and Labrador, particularly the people on the fishing boats. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. And now to Conservative side, Mr. Calkins, for 5 minutes or less, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. Just going to throw some questions straight at you without much preamble. So in determining your strategy to increase the populations of the southern resident killer whale, what are the desired population targets that your department and you have agreed upon for the short, medium, and long term?
So the south resident killer whales face three different sources of threats: contaminants in the water, the lack of availability of prey, which is largely Chinook salmon, and physical and acoustic disturbance from ships. And so the measures that we have taken are intent on addressing the declines in numbers we've seen. The focus for all species at risk is initially stopping the decline and then starting to turn that around over time. That's exactly what we are intent on doing through the measures we put into place.
So you don't have any numbers per se, because the population is actually in its normal range between 70 and 90 right now, even though it's been in decline for several years. You don't actually have a hard and fast number other than just stopping the decline and waiting and seeing what happens?
Well, I'm not sure I would say that the population is in its normal range. Only 15, 20 years ago, there were 95. There are now 74. So, and if you look at the distribution of males and females, and those of calf-bearing age, there are significant concerns about the viability of the species going forward. If we are going to act to save this species, we need to act now.
Okay, so I would argue that out of the three pillars that you're talking about, the most important one is the availability of prey, which leads me to my next question, because ships have been present while the killer whales have been there, while the population has been increasing and decreasing. The contaminants that are there, the long-term bioaccumulations, I'm not going to get into whether or not that's a direct or imminent threat, but I think food and starvation is considered an imminent threat. So my question for you is, there are certain salmon hatcheries that have been utilizing various methods to rear Chinook salmon that are demonstrably more resilient. So this would be like an S2-5 Chinook salmon, for example, that doesn't actually get into the ocean water until it's at least 2 years of age. It's much larger, it's much more resilient, it's much more able to evade predation and so on. Some of these hatcheries that I know of on Vancouver Island specifically are not being used by the Salmon Enhancement Program. You've allocated some more money recently, $60-some million for this. Will these hatcheries be enveloped into the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and will those, there's a couple 100,000 Chinook salmon sitting in a hatchery right now that could be released and put out there, and they're not getting anywhere with the department. Can you explain why that might be?
So part of the whales initiative we announced a couple of weeks ago was actually more money for hatcheries. We're in the process of assessing exactly which hatcheries would be the best, that have the greatest impact. Certainly, the primary source of food are the Fraser runs, and so we're looking primarily at those, but that is something that we have not yet firmly decided. I would not agree with your characterization that prey is the single largest issue. In fact, prey and transportation are inextricably linked because the whales do not forage when they are disturbed, and it's simply not true to say that the number of ships that were there 20 years ago are the same as they are today. There is a significant volume that is increased every year out of the Port of Vancouver and the Port of Seattle.
Can you provide the committee with a breakdown of the costs associated with the decision to cancel the expropriation of quota from Clearwater? And can you assure this committee that any new process to award contracts will be above board and transparent?
I can assure you that we are continuing forward with a process to encourage Indigenous participation in the fishery. And as I announced a few months ago, we will be moving forward with a process that will be transparent and informed by third parties to ensure we get it right.
Have you considered increasing the availability of the preferred prey, which you and I both know is the Chinook salmon, for the southern resident killer whale, through any science-based targeted predator control program to reduce the pinniped predation around the estuaries and river environments where young salmon are present?
Yeah, we're looking at all ways to increase the amount of Chinook, whether that's reducing the take from recreational commercial fisheries, it's hatcheries, it's investments in habitat, but we're also looking at issues around pinnipeds and whether that is a significant issue. The science to date would tell you it's not as big an issue as many think, but there is more science being done. We are doing it ourselves. I know the Pacific Salmon Foundation is doing its own study on this issue, and we're certainly looking at that.
Okay. And the last question I have for you is on the illegal, unreported, and unregulated catch. What are you going to do to resolve the issues of unreported, specifically unreported catch on the Fraser?
Well, I think it gets back to one of the questions that we had earlier around enforcement. You know, it's important that we have rules, and then it's important that we have rules that are respected. And so we are enhancing our enforcement capacity across the country, from coast to coast to coast, to ensure that we can address any issues that there may be with respect to unreported catch.
Thank you, Mr. Corkins. Now back to the government side. Mr. Finnegan for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. And on the Atlantic coast, the Atlantic salmon is in trouble. As you know, it's been declining, up and down for the last number of years. And it's certainly attributed to many factors, some that we can take action and some that we're not even sure why. The returns are very low, for instance, but there's other factors such as predators, whether it be the striped bass or the gray seal or other predators. And but there's other action that we can take, such as repairing the banks on the river, creating cold pools so that it has habitats, especially during the last few summers, which has been some of the hottest one in history. And some of those action we can certainly take on the short term. With the year 2019 being the International Year of the Salmon, I'm just wondering if there's any new initiatives or any initiative that we could put in place to do all we can to protect this. It's a very economic industry, especially with the recreational for my area and the Miramichi area, but also other rivers are starting to see lower numbers. Being the International Year of the Salmon, is there anything that the department has in plan to do all we can again to help the salmon survive and to expand? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Atlantic salmon is an iconic species that's very important, and clearly some of the things that we've been seeing are a cause for some significant concern. The department has been doing quite a lot to try to address some of the issues that are there, but maybe I can ask the Parliamentary Secretary to just talk a little bit about the International Year of the Salmon and some of the things that you've been working on.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Finnegan, I had occasion last week actually to attend an event put on by the Maliseet Nation Conservation Council to kick off the Atlantic Year of the Salmon, and to talk about some of the things that the government are doing, and they specifically relate to investments in science. There's Atlantic Salmon Research Joint Venture that's a partnership with Indigenous communities, academia, and conservation organizations. There's also the catch and release that was put in place in the Restigouche, Miramichi, Margaree rivers, and some in Newfoundland. And finally, there's significant work being done around habitat. The part of the Oceans Protection Plan, the Coastal Restoration Fund. So those things in particular were highlighted in that presentation and will form a significant part of the government initiatives going forward.
Thank you, Parliament Secretary. And shifting to small crafts and harbour, do we know how long we get our money back once we divest a small craft, small harbour? A lot of communities, reluctantly want, get rid of their harbor that they've had for a long time. And do we know how long it takes by the time we remove it and all the environmental cleanup and everything? How long does it take to get our money back? Would you have that figure so I could answer my constituents on that?
Sure. I mean, small craft harbors is obviously critical. They're critical for many coastal communities, and that is precisely why we, in Budget 2018, announced another $250 million to be focused on small craft harbor projects. Part of it, as you note, relates to divestitures with respect to non-core harbors. And maybe I can turn to Sylvie and she can just talk about some of the economics. I'm assuming that it is often project specific, but maybe you can give it just a general answer.
Thank you. It is project specific, but as well it depends on the state of the harbor that we are trying to divest, so whether or not there are repairs that need to put it in better condition before the divestiture takes place. Sometimes the negotiations with whoever is wanting to take on the harbor can be quite lengthy, so it really does vary. But through the budget 2018 money that we've received for divestiture, we already have some project-ready pieces that we are able to deliver in the next 2 years.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Finnegan.
Okay, thanks.
Now to the Conservative side, Mr. Arnold, for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I'm going to touch on a subject that's been key to me and constituents in my riding, and brought it to the attention of previous ministers. Last October, the former Fisheries Minister committed to increasing federal resources for aquatic invasive species programs, prevention and activities in British Columbia. However, the actual increase in resources delivered was approximately only $50,000 annually, and this is shared between BC and the Yukon. Of the $10.1 million of ongoing funding DFO has for AIS activities nationally, about 86% is provided to fighting two species, invasive Asian carp and sea lamprey in Ontario. My question is, why does DFO continue to ignore the acute ecological and economic threats that AIS pose to Western Canada, and will the minister personally ensure that British Columbia receives an equitable level of funding to fight aquatic invasive species?
Aquatic invasive species are obviously important for most of the provinces, if not all of the provinces in Canada. It's certainly important in British Columbia, it's important in Alberta and Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and it's important all across Eastern Canada and Central Canada. We, in 2017 and 18, announced $43.8 million for work on invasive species, plus a little over $10 million for AIS management, with a lot of which is coordinating with the provinces and territories, which obviously have a role here. With respect to spending in British Columbia, there was about $850,000 announced just this past year with respect to aquatic invasive species. A lot of that was focused in the Okanagan. But it's certainly an issue that we are live to, and it's an important issue to be on top of to ensure that we don't end up with a bigger problem that we would have that we would not have had if we had taken action in the short term.
That problem has been identified as being a $50 million per year maintenance problem for communities in one watershed alone. So again, I pressure you for more impact on that. Minister, I want to challenge you a little bit on the statement you made that pinnipeds don't seem to be an issue on competition with the southern resident killer whales. I was just provided a document last night quoting some numbers here comparing harbor seals in 1972 versus what they are now. They've gone from 210 to approximately 355,000. On the California sea lions grew from a number of less than 6,000 to 47,000. Stellar sea lions increased from 74,000 to 78,000. In the Salish Sea, the harbor seal population grew from approximately 8,600 in 1975 to over 77,800. How can you believe, or have you been misled with the information you've been provided, that pinnipeds are not a serious competition for prey for the southern resident killer whales?
Well, let me just correct one thing, which is I didn't say that the populations of pinnipeds hadn't been increasing. They have been increasing. That's a statistical fact.
You stated
that's
they
a statistical fact,
for prey.
if you would let me finish. If you actually look at the science that's been done on pinnipeds, particularly on the West Coast, it would tell you that less than 10% of their diet are salmon. But that being said,
your official tried to say that last week, and we have evidence that during the key migration time of smolt coming down out of the rivers, reaching the ocean environment, that it's up to 90% of the pinniped's diet.
Okay, and certainly if you want to bring forward science that would be considered, we're always open to new science. But what I would say to you is we have made a commitment as part of the review that we are doing with various stakeholders, including fishers, is that the review of the pinnipeds and the impact that they have with respect to science are definitely part of that process.
So you are moving forward on
Absolutely.
Activities around that.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. One other line I see out of the supplementary estimates here is, I'll give you a page in a second. Oh, it's actually on Schedule 1. Refers to the authority to purchase and dispose of commercial fishing vessels. Could you elaborate a little further on what that is? Are you simply buying fishermen out, taking them out of the business? Just purchase and disposal of commercial fishing vessels.
So maybe I can actually turn that over to Jen.
In 30 seconds or less.
It's, I'm going to take a shot at it. We'll look to see if this is actually correct. If it's not correct, we'll get you the correct information. There is some of the funding in this in the subs A that speak to providing access to indigenous groups as part of treaty negotiations. Part of that is retiring access from commercial fishers and providing the access to the indigenous groups. It may well be that. If it's not that, we'll get you the answer to the question.
Okay, thank you. Back to the government side now, Mr. Hardy, for 5 minutes or less, please.
There we go. All right. I'm going to split my time with our fellow West Coaster, Ms. Bay, so she has a chance to ask a question. Commissioner Hutchison, it was good to hear that our Coast Guard vessels are going to be outfitted with a towing rig. How many capable vessels will we have on the West Coast, and will they be able to, basically do the same as the ones we're leasing? Go ahead.
All of the large vessels on the West Coast will be outfitted with tow kits. I believe that's 7 off the top of my head. If that's wrong, I'll correct it. Okay. Will they be as capable as the 2 that we're leasing? The answer to that is not in every case. The 2 that we're leasing have very high bollard pull. That's the technical expression. They're very capable tow vessels, where many of the ships we operate are designed for other primary purposes, science, for example. So,
I'm really short of time, so I guess we'll say that there's probably 9 capable, 2 really, really capable, and others that could handle smaller vessels. Is that a fair?
That's a fair statement.
Good. We are looking at an equitable share of wealth coming out of the ocean, and there does seem to be a tremendous imbalance between the risk undertaken by the various players in the harvest and the returns that they get. Minister Wilkinson, is the government open to a good, clear review and perhaps some changes to the regime on the West Coast?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have heard the differing perspectives from various groups on the West Coast. I think we look forward to understanding the views of various stakeholders through the work that this committee will do going forward. The department will support the committee by providing research and summarizing factual information about socioeconomic aspects of licensing and fisheries management. But it's going to be very important for us to hear what folks say to you and what you say to us, and then we will need to make a determination about how best to move forward.
Good. And one last short question. With respect to the hatcheries to basically provide more Chinook salmon into the system, will that strategy include hatcheries and activities further up the Fraser watershed?
It's certainly possible. As I say, we have not fully made the decision about which hatcheries, but certainly, the main criteria will be which are the ones that will have the greatest impact on providing available prey for the south resident killer whales.
Thank you. And Ms. May?
Just over 2 minutes, Ms. May.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Ken. Look, with a very small amount of time, I'm going to be economical about this. The dilbit studies. The best dilbit studies done in the Government of Canada in terms of honesty and natural conditions being replicated are the ones done by Fisheries and Oceans in the Bedford Institute of Technology in Halifax. The ones that are least likely to be accurate because they were done in tanks of water in Alberta were done by Natural Resources Canada. There's a preponderance of effort to focus only on the ones that say dilbit floats and can be cleaned up based on studies in tanks of water in Alberta. So as the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, I just wanted to speak to draw your attention how really good the studies that have been published and peer-reviewed, led by Chief Investigator Thomas King, which suggests that you really are very unlikely to be able to clean up dilbit, that the oil balls will sink, and you'll have to heat them somehow underwater to get them up and out of the ecosystem. At this point, can you honestly tell us we have a clue about how to clean up dilbit based on studies in your department?
With due respect, Ms. May, we released last year a couple of different studies that actually had, I think it was 57 peer-reviewed reports that actually said exactly the opposite to what you're saying. One of the folks that you actually quote on an ongoing basis is the Royal Society of Canada report. The fellow who actually chaired that is a DFO scientist who actually would tell you that Diluted bitumen behaves no differently in water than any other conventional crude.
I've spoken with Dr. Lee, and he hasn't said that when he briefed parliamentarians here. So there's a difference of opinion and even a difference of reporting on the published documents that exist. But bitumen does separate from diluent. The question of how quickly it weathers, how quickly it sinks, and how we'd possibly manage a cleanup is put in particularly harsh light by the recent efforts off the coast of Newfoundland to deal with the husk whale spill, which isn't bitumen and is conventional crude. And we're really quite limited in the ability to respond in open ocean in harsh conditions. So it's difficult to see how anything in the Oceans Protection Plan would give anyone on the West Coast any comfort about the threat of a dilbit spill.
Well, again, I would rely on the science with respect to dilbit, but with respect to ensuring that we actually are in a position to clean up spills, we have made enormous investments through the Oceans Protection Plan to ensure that that's the case. Obviously, the most sensitive area with respect to the West Coast is within the Burrard Inlet itself, and certainly there are enormous resources that are going into ensuring that you can respond to any kind of a spill, whether it's diluted bitumen or it's bunker C that is in the 3,200 container ships and cruise ships that come into the harbour every year. It's important that we ensure that those resources exist, but I would tell you that even more important is ensuring that we are preventing those spills, and we are making the investments in things like the radar stations that I actually announced last week in British Columbia to ensure that that's the case.
One quick
Thank you. You're gone way over time.
Thank you.
Mr. Donnelly for 3 minutes, please, or less.
I just have time for, I think, 2 quick questions on one of my favorite topics, on salmon aquaculture, specifically on closed containment technology. West Coast wild salmon are under threat from disease and pollutants, as you know, and sea lice, originating from open net cage salmon farms. Many say the future of salmon aquaculture is closed containment. The technology exists. It is economically feasible, and the prospect of jobs and economic opportunities are immense. Canada is well positioned to become a world leader in closed containment, but we need to act now. Globally, money is being invested in land-based salmon farming. Florida, for instance, as you know, is building a 90,000-ton facility, which is the size of our West Coast tonnage annually. So there's no time for delay. Canada must invest in a safe, sustainable industry that protects wild salmon and employment, develops new technologies, jobs, and export opportunities. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell the committee what your position is of removing these farms from the wild salmon migration route and transitioning this industry to safe land-based technology.
So I made a few statements on this subject a few weeks ago on the BC coast. We will be moving towards a more fulsome implementation of the precautionary principle. We will be looking at moving towards area-based management on a go-forward basis, and we are working with the province actively to ensure that our efforts are aligned. We believe that it's important that we understand the current status and the potential barriers to cost-effective closed containment, and so we will be moving forward with a study, an expedited study on that, likely in concert with the province, ideally with terms of reference that are agreed by both the environmental community and the industry, to ensure that we understand exactly where we are situated with respect to technology and cost, to enable us, if in fact we are not quite there, to figure out what the pathway is to enable us to get there. In the very same way that we did with solar and wind technology 20 years ago, we need to do the same thing. That would be both closed containment on land and it would be closed containment in ocean.
Great, thank you. And there's, I encourage you to talk with Land Aqua. They've got a 50,000 metric ton proposal. Last question in the remaining seconds on whales. The supplementary estimates include $1 million for the Whale Innovation Challenge, which is to fund a contest for, quote, new detection and tracking technologies to reduce the risk of collisions and entanglements, unquote. But it won't be decided until 2020. So my question is, if the protection of whales is so important to the government, shouldn't we be investing significantly more money into public research into these technologies today?
So I think the immediate term is we are investing significant resources in putting into place measures that we know are going to be effective today, and that's both with respect to the North American right whale and the South Resident killer whale. We are also investing resources internally in terms of science, but this is a challenge to Canadians. It's a challenge for innovative entrepreneurs to come forward with ideas that can help us with our internal efforts and the efforts of others who are invested in this space. And maybe the deputy wants to speak for a second.
Thank you very much for the question, and the minister is quite correct. What's interesting about the Nesta Prize is we were challenged to have an opportunity for international expertise. So it's actually Canadians and citizens around the planet will have a chance to bid. So it's different, and it's not the only research, but it really is looking for cutting-edge ideas, and it is being administered in an entirely independent way, and that was just another opportunity to bring resources and focus on a really important issue for us.
Thank you. We'll continue on with questioning. We have some time remaining. To the government side now. And Minister, I understand you were here till time up?
I think it is time up, unfortunately. I have another engagement, but I think my deputy was going to stay, and
Okay, we'll continue on with the questioning.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Minister, for appearing. We look forward to you coming back again real soon. We'll just suspend for a minute just to say goodbye to the Minister. Okay, if we can get started again. Now to the government side for 3 minutes. Mr. Fraser, please, and I'd like to welcome Robert Lamarand, Director General, Indigenous Affairs and Reconciliation.
Thank you.
Welcome, sir. Mr. Fraser, for 3 minutes.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the officials for being here. I want to ask my first question regarding small craft harbors. I'm from southwestern Nova Scotia and represent an area that is that the fishery, especially the lobster fishery, is absolutely critical to our local economy. We know that the fishery has done extremely well over the last number of years, and as a result of that, there has been a huge issue regarding the capacity at our wharves and small craft harbors in southwestern Nova Scotia, like many other places across Atlantic Canada, because the boats are getting bigger and they're running out of room. There's also issues at small craft harbors regarding the repair of some of the small craft harbors that haven't had investment for many years. And there's also an issue with dredging. And they all come out of the same budget for small craft harbors, and a lot of the harbor authorities that I represent and that I've heard from across Atlantic Canada are saying that the dredging work that happens is just good enough to get you through the year, and there's not enough long-term planning with regard to dredging work so that you don't have to come back over and over and over and kind of keep doing that same work. I know you're well aware of this, and I was pleased that in the last budget there was $250 million in B-based funding for increasing some of those capital projects that can get done for small craft harbors. But I don't think it's enough to get us there for the long-term planning, and there's a lot of wharves in my area that critically need work, and in many ways it's supporting the local economy to ensure that they have what they need for not only to be safe, but have what they need to keep the economies going in our smaller communities. I wonder if you can comment on that as far as the importance of these investments in small craft harbors for the long term.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you so much for the question. That's a fantastic question, and I would say your concerns are quite valid. And unfortunately not incredibly unique. Interesting, the issue of dredging, as the climate changes, as tides change, those kinds of imperatives, we see them and we see the demand. As you noted, government has made a significant investment of $250 million. We could always use more. It truly is an important program for safety, for economic access, actually on all coasts of the country. I may turn to Sylvie if she wants to highlight a bit of our plans.
Just thank you. Just to pick up on the issue of dredging, it is something that we are spending more and more money on every year. As the Deputy Minister noted, climate change is complicating things, as well as you referred, the larger vessels mean that we have to dredge at a greater depth. We have more and more cases of emergency dredging that are more frequent and unpredictable. So we are trying to better predict what kinds of emergencies we might be facing, and we've been working with harbour authorities to do a better job of that. And we've also identified contractors to provide services under much shorter service. So it is something that we're working on very seriously.
Thank you. I'll go to the Conservative side for 3 minutes or less. Mr. Ranald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you for all of the officials for being here. I want to question a little bit more on the funding that's being and direction towards illegal offshore fishing and so on. Seems to have been significant commitment that way. Is there any way of enforcement once this illegal fishing has been discovered through the patrols and so on? We hear lots of it's been discovered, been reported back to the host country. Does anything ever happen after that?
Thank you very much for the question, through you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, IUU fishing internationally is incredibly challenging. The current global governance through the NAO really does move the governance back to the home countries. So it is an ongoing challenge. It's something the Minister noted that we are going to the Sustainable Oceans Conference in Kenya next week, and it's going to be an area that Canada is going to focus on because we want to bring some more global attention to IUU and the real challenges it actually brings on some of our global stocks.
So there, in other words, you don't know of any concrete enforcement that's been done afterwards. Next question is, have you ever witnessed any of this illegal offshore fishing yourself?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I actually had the opportunity to travel to Japan. Through our CMP programming, we have Operation DriftNet, and I actually had the opportunity to see not see it myself, but I saw photographs from previous missions that had been flown out of Hakodate, Japan, and it's quite something. It's pretty compelling when you see great big drift nets that really have captured a lot of resource.
Was there any action out of it, any results? Did it achieve anything, or did we just observe it and report it?
So Canada's actions were to observe it and to report it in the international forum.
And that's where it ends on our responsibility. Okay, any more time?
30 seconds.
How does your department manage unreported fishing within Canada? How do they determine other openings and so on when there's significant unreported catch taking place?
Thank you for the question. I just would like to clarify. So domestic, do you have an example that you're thinking of?
Very touchy question. I can understand why you're so careful with your answer.
I actually want to give you a proper one. Yeah.
Yeah. No. We know that there's significant unreported fishing. I've sat on sport fish advisory boards for years, and it was year after year after year. The staff were trying to manage a fishery when they had no idea what was being taken in the unreported catch.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. And to Mr. Donnelly for 3 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to our officials for being here for round two. And the minister spoke about marine protected areas in his opening remarks. Supplementary estimates include only $870,000 to protect Canada's nature parks and wild spaces. Budget 2018 talked about $21 million in funding. So I'm wondering where the rest of the money is and what's the plan, and what specifically is the plan for the $870,000?
Okay. Mr. Chair, through you, thank you very much for the question. I will turn it to the CFO to help unpack the numbers, but happy to talk to you about our plans going forward to move to reaching our 10% in 2020. Canada at present, we're at 7.9%, and we are finishing some of the areas that we have done, that we've said we're going to do, and we're moving forward actually to close the gap quite quickly. Jen can probably give us the detail on the specific SUPS numbers.
So the 870 is the first year funding. It's related to a horizontal item for the Nature Legacy for Canada initiative and cost-effective plan that meets international land and wildlife conservation targets, transitions the species at risk program from recovery planning to protection and recovery action, and contributes to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples while delivering conservation outcomes. So this is related to, and I don't know if Philip wanted to add anything to this, related to a partnership that we have with Environment.
So yeah, this is related to the species at risk program that were transferred to the department. So it's not related to marine protected area, but it's related to species at risk. So the program were previously managed by Environment and Climate Change Canada, and we were providing advice to ECCC, and they were doing the agreement. Now this money has been transferred to our department, so we manage all the aquatic species at risk program.
Okay, I think I have a few seconds left for one last question. I didn't hear much of a difference between the 870,000 and the 20 million. But if there is a follow-up, perhaps you could send that to the committee. We'd appreciate getting that information. But on the Indigenous programs, the SUP allocate 15 million to advance reconciliation on Indigenous and treaty rights issues. Could you talk about what the $15 million fund will be used for, and what, if any, connection to DFO's reconciliation programs have to the Government of Canada's proposed recognition and implementation of rights framework?
Mr. Chair, thank you. Through you, thank you for the question. I'm going to turn that over to Kevin and to Rob Lamarant to give us some detail. Thank you for the question.
So I'll start. There's two significant items for Indigenous reconciliation in these SUPs. One is 33 million, which is East Coast, related to the negotiations with First Nations on the East Coast that has been ongoing for a while. The $15 million is for West Coast negotiations. There are a large set of negotiations currently underway. These funds, in the case of $15 million, it's actually moved forward from last year because the negotiations are ongoing. But it absolutely links to the rights reconciliation framework and DFO's part to be our effort to contribute to the government's overall efforts around reconciliation and addressing rights.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Pretty much covers it.
We'll return now to the government side to Mr. Hardy for 3 minutes or less.
Okay, a short comment from me, then I'll pass it over to Mr. Finnegan, who will then pass it over to Mr. Fraser. We're being very efficient here. This is a comment. We've heard in many of our studies, and in most recently in the study that we're underway with in small craft harbors, that the local knowledge of the people who are on the ground is quite often not given due weight in DFO decisions. We heard in the small craft harbor case where the local people had very clear ideas of improvements that were needed. DFO came in with engineers and others who basically did something differently, and we didn't get value for money or the result that everybody was looking for. This is something that you will hear again and again from us, and I would hope that in future studies, when we have a chance to talk to you, that we'll hear a little bit more about the closer collaboration with people who are on the ground, who actually know what's going on locally, because I think that that's going to be important for good results. Mr. Finnegan.
Et je vais aller vite en français. Vous avez reçu...
Quickly in French, you received a letter recently from La FOPO, the Acadian Federation of Fishers sur l'Alseigne. They were concerned about closure of some zones due to the whales. There's been a request from some regions to start the season earlier, and there are many concerns as to safety and the economic aspect. Some regions will be able to go ahead, others no. Just for you to be aware of this and to make sure that there are no regions that are put at a disadvantage because of this. I'm not sure if the answer is to go earlier, but there are certainly some concerns about that. I just wanted to mention it.
Okay. Thanks very much. The Oceans Protection Plan and the Atlantic Fisheries Fund have done significant good in ensuring that we're relying on the best science and data available, ensuring that conservation of our fisheries resources is a primary concern for the government, to ensure sustainability of the resources for the long term. And so I think there's a lot of good happening with the Oceans Protection Plan, supported by the Atlantic Fisheries Fund in Atlantic Canada, where I know a lot of smaller organizations, industry-led, have come forward and stepped up to say that we need more science to know what's going on in our oceans for the long term. One issue with regard to marine protected areas, however, is that there's some misinformation or a misunderstanding about how marine protected areas work. I hope there's more consultation with the people on the ground to ensure they understand that a marine protected area, for example, if it is if it is put in place, it doesn't necessarily close a fishery. I'm thinking particularly of the lobster fishery, that there can be other ways to ensure conservation for the long term. And I'm just wondering on your thoughts with consultation with industry on the marine protected areas in particular.
Mr. Chair, through you, thank you very much for the question. And we really appreciate it because there is a little bit of a challenge in terms of the nomenclature. People do confuse what marine protected areas are. So we actually have various levels of protection. So when you hear marine protected area, that typically refers to an Oceans Act MPA, which is actually fairly close to human activity. But we've got so many levels of protection. I'll pick a Nova Scotian example because I'm very lucky to be from there. We're looking at an area on the eastern shore, and it's an inshore area for protection. But the biodiversity we're trying to protect in that particular area, it's not impacted by the lobster fishery, and we've communicated that. It's quite, we expect that to go forward as well. Actually, there's some harvesting of seaweed. That activity can happen as well. So we can do a better job as we go forward to make sure we're clear and we communicate what we're trying to achieve. I do make the joke occasionally that, it's not very often that people say to DFO, please slow down. But in the case of marine protected areas, when I started my job, Canada was at about 1% of marine protection, and the mandate was 5% protection by the end of 2017. So we did go quite quickly, and in the very good work that went out, lots of maps. There are stakeholders who have said, hold on, what do you mean? And we are actually working with provinces and other stakeholders just to make sure we explain it and have an opportunity for folks to make sure they have their say and that they have a clear line of sight on the protections that we're trying to get to, what's in, what's out, and how it actually will roll out. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. Now to the Conservative side, Mr. Cochins, for 3 minutes or less, please.
So I'm going to give Mr. Udega has a question, then I'll take over from there.
Fine. When you're ready, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the department officials for being here today. So I have data is everything, science and data. So I was curious, like the our Mel Arnold, our MP, asked a question about municipal waste. And the minister responded, says, well, that's an environmental concern. That goes to that committee. But I wasn't, about a month ago, I was substituting in the environmental committee, and I asked the same question. And they say they don't have any data on that. So which department collects data on municipal waste and the toxins in that municipal waste, if it's not your department?
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the question. So it actually is Environment and Climate Change Canada. When substances move into the watercourse, it is actually ECCC that has that.
So why isn't that data available to us? I asked that question in the environmental committee, and they had no data.
Thank you for the question. I'm happy to follow up with my departmental colleagues, and I can actually find your question. If that's useful, I'm happy to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. To the department officials that are here, following, I think, was some fairly intense political pressure, the government relented and exempted fishing fuel from the proposed, or the now implemented carbon tax for the approximately 46,000 fishers in Canada. However, there's all kinds of incidental costs that fishers will bear as a result of the carbon tax. One only has to look at the cost of shipping lobster. I'm looking at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans website right now. About 2/3 of Canada's 50 million pound lobster catch is shipped alive to distant markets. This involves coastal storage in crates, cars, tanks, tidal pounds, and for a few days or up to several months, shipment for 1 to 5 days. All of these things are going to be costs that are going to be borne by the fishing industry. Any equipment that's brought to the wharf, anything that's taken away from the wharf, all of that is going to have increased costs because all of it consumes energy. Has the department done a study, notwithstanding the carbon tax exemption, on the fuel for the boat alone, on what the cost of the carbon tax will actually be to the fishing industry?
Mr. Chair, through you, thank you very much for the question. I'll turn to Sylvie to ask if we've actually done that work. My sense is that we've not done an in-depth study. That would be my initial take. Sylvie, you may have some initial data.
That's correct. We haven't done a study, but we'd be happy to look into it and get back to you with some preliminary analysis on that.
Well, I look forward to that. The other question I have is in regards to is going to have to wait.
Mr. Donnelly, for the quick question, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Turning to icebreakers and the Canadian Coast Guard, the SUPSA proposed $827.3 million in funding to procure 3 icebreakers for the Canadian Coast Guard. The Parliamentary Budget Officer notes that this funding relates to purchasing and retrofitting 3 used Norwegian icebreakers as an interim measure, and a Canadian press report states that the 3 Norwegian-made icebreakers will cost up to 30% more projected due to import tariffs and brokerage fees and other costs. So when will these 3 icebreakers be in service to provide interim capacity? Where will they be located, and why were the tariffs and other additional costs not included in DFO's original cost estimates?
Thank you for the question. The first icebreaker will come into service several weeks from now, before Christmas. The other 2 icebreakers will be undergoing a more extensive refit, and they will come into service later. I'm just going to check the dates to make sure I don't give you wrong dates. Where they will serve is they're not being assigned to a specific zone. They'll be assigned where we need them as we take other ships to do refit work and vessel life extension work. So these ships are meant to maintain a capability that allows us the flexibility to work on other ships. So, for example, when the first ship goes into service, it will be serving sort of the northwest corner of Newfoundland initially. But these ships are very capable. They can work throughout the St. Lawrence region, the Gulf. They can work the Arctic. They've all been to the North Pole before. They're very capable vessels. Just want to double check those dates, which I have here. The cost So the cost of acquiring the vessels.
Just on the sorry, on the you were going to talk, or I hope you were going to come back with the tariffs and the brokerage fees.
So when we buy a vessel domestically, we don't pay an import duty on it. So we would show the purchase price contract. By separating these figures out, you can actually make a contract-to-contract comparison on a purchase of a vessel. If we had put those all together, then you'd have a project cost as opposed to a purchase cost, if you will. So the other point, which I had mentioned earlier, is out of the $217 million above the contract price, the majority of that money actually is returned to government coffers. So is it fairly reflected as a cost of acquiring the ship or not? We'd like to give the cost of acquiring the ship and separate those dollars out. That's what we did.
And the other two?
Thank you, Mr.
Just the other two dates.
Quickly.
Just real quick.
Pardon me, the other two dates?
This year, next year?
They won't be this year. The first ship will come into service this year, and the following, I believe, are 2019 and 2020, respectively.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. I want to say a special thank you to our guests who have appeared this afternoon. We greatly appreciate your attendance. I know you've been more than cooperative on many occasions here before the committee, so again, thank you. Before we go into committee business, I will call for the votes and the supplement A. Shall vote 1A under Fisheries and Oceans carry? And division? Or? Division, okay. Shall vote 5A under Fisheries and Oceans carry?
On division.
Shall vote 10A under Fisheries and Oceans carry?
On division.
All right. Shall I report supplementary estimates A 2018-19 to the House?
On division.
Okay. Thank you. We'll now suspend for a moment while we go into committee business.
If I could, Mr. Chair, just quickly, I may have missed it earlier, but just in recognition of our Coast Guard employees that are here today and Coast Guard employees right across the country from coast to coast to coast, it is Navy and Coast Guard Day today. So I thank you all for your service, and I'm sure all of the committee is going to do that.
Thank you.